beg you to stay and have some sober experiences. God has blessed me to have sober experiences since July 11th, 1988. For that, I'm eternally grateful. If the creek don't rise in about 3 weeks, I'll celebrate 32 years. But it's just like at the liquor store, they didn't give me no fronts. So we can't clap for me to have 32 years. I have 31 years right now, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. Those of you that are new, and I really want to beg you to stay and to have some sober experiences. I want to thank Greg for introducing me to Tiffany, and for Tiffany asking me to come out and share my experience, strength, and hope. This is what I do. This is what I do, and I do it because I'm supposed to do it for my life to get better. And I'm real clear on that. I feel like, you know, I sweat a lot, so don't think that I'm scared of you. I can't see nobody but Tiffany. So anyway, you know, I got sober because alcohol and other substances stopped working. And it was a combination of other substances that stopped working. You know, I'm going to tell you in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, what it's like today. For me, when I say that, I really don't tell you in a general way. I don't know how you tell in a general way how you threw up in the middle of a party. I don't know how you tell in a general way how when you smoked angel dust and you laid down in a puddle of water and you thought it was a waterbed, how do you talk about that in a general way? How do you tell in a general way when I did cocaine that I sort of kind of kept my eye up to the peephole at the hotel for 8 hours? How do you do that in a general way? I just can't do it in a general way, so I'm going to be very specific. I'm not going to disrespect Alcoholics Anonymous at all, but I'm going to tell you Jimmie A's story. Can we turn that air conditioner up? Oh, they left. Okay. What's good about this is this. I was supposed to come out there sometime last year and drive out and speak, and circumstances didn't allow it. And I told Greg the next time you needed me, I'd be there. And when Tiffany called me, I was more than happy to be there. This light is hot, man. So anyway, so I'm happy to be here. I'm going to tell you what it was like, what happened, what it's like today. Alcohol, of course, was my first, and it progressed from there. And it progressed to everything. You know, I did different types of powders. I did different types of pills. The only thing I didn't do is anything involving a needle going into my body. Even to this day, I have not stuck a needle into my body, and nobody else has, not a doctor, not a nurse, or anybody that I've seen. I'm the kind of guy, when you get ready to take my blood, I stick my arm out and I turn my head because I don't want to see a needle go into my body. Now, how's that for a diabetic? Even when I prick my finger, I turn my head to prick my finger to check my sugar. You know, alcohol worked for me. I studied the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want you to know that reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and studying the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous are quite different. When I read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I thought it was a foreign language. When I studied it, I was quite sure that it was a textbook and it was something that I needed to study. The first time I got introduced to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was in 1988. And man, I read it and I said, how can this book stop me from doing what I'm doing? So what they told me I needed was a sponsor. Well, I was in treatment, and they told me in treatment there's three things you need to do when you leave, Jimmy. One, you need to get a sponsor, you need to go to meetings, and you need to study the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, I thought I knew a lot, so what I did is I sponsored myself. I went to one meeting, and I read the sports page of the Pasadena Star-News. And of course, at 90 days, I drank again. You notice I didn't use the term relapse. I'm real clear that relapse is to return to a former state of mind and or body. I hadn't left that place. I hadn't left that state of mind or that state of body. My body was always wanting that drug or that alcohol. My mind was always thinking. It was always preoccupied with drinking and using. So I just drank again. And after 90 days, I drank. And what I did is I went to some friend's house where I knew they would be getting loaded. I knew they would be drinking. And so what I did is I pulled up, and it was about 9 o'clock at night. The porch light was on, and as soon as I stopped my car and I got out and I shut my door, it was almost automatic. When the sound of my door closing and the porch light went off, it was almost automatic. And so I said, damn, I'm in the right place to test this thing called recovery. And so what happens is I go to the door and I ring the doorbell, and my buddy answers the door, and he starts to stutter, and he's never stuttered while we were talking before, and he goes, Jim, I don't think you want to be here. And I said, oh, absolutely, man, I'm here, I'm good. He says, well, man, we might be doing some things you might not want to do in here. And I said, well, what are you talking about, man? I'm good, man, I got 90 days today. And so he comes, he says, well, come on in. I go inside, man, and what we do is we sit down and we're having a conversation, and I'm doing most of the talking, and they're not talking. And I knew what that behavior was like. I knew that when I was getting loaded, I wasn't the one talking. Matter of fact, man, when I was doing cocaine, I would go around, man, with a pad in my back pocket and a pencil in my hand, and I would write notes to people, man, because I didn't have any voice, you know? And that's not a real good way to try to get, you know, next to a girl, man. You know, you're trying to talk to a girl, and nothing's coming out of your mouth, and you're writing her a note. And it's not a note like when you're in elementary school. It's like a note like, pass the pipe. You're hitting it too long. You're burning it too much, you know. But I really want to talk to this girl because they're actually attractive, you know. But what happens is I go in, man, and so I knew that behavior. And what happens is they're sitting apart from each other, so I sat between them. And they waited as long as they could because they was trying to be cool. They was doing what we do because we're selfish and self-centered. And what they did is they broke out a pipe, and one of them took a hit, and he went to pass it to my other buddy, and I was sitting between them. So I just grabbed it and passed it to my other buddy, and he took a hit, and then he went to pass it back to my other buddy, and I grabbed it and I passed it back to him. And my other buddy over here says, hey, Jim, you really have stopped, huh? I go, yeah, man, I'm done. I'm done, man. And so he says, you really don't want any, huh? I go, nah, man, not really. So then my buddy goes to pass it back again, man. I said, well, let me try it. So what I did, man, is I just hit it, and it was just hot air. And I just passed it over to the other guy. And we just sat there and we started talking, and things were happening in this room, man, that I was familiar with, man. There was things like the radio was on. I could see the power was on, but the sound was down. The TV was on, but there was a blanket covering the TV. You know, I could see, I knew this behavior, man. So what happens, man, is He says, well, Jim, you really didn't want it? He says, that didn't do anything to you? I said, oh, no, man, that didn't do anything to me. And so he puts on what came to be known by me is what they call a booyah. And a booyah is that one of those ones that you hit and the bells ring. And he put that on there, man, and I took that hit, man, and I couldn't shake that pipe loose for the next 5 years. And the reason that I tell you this story first, because this is where it really gets bad. You know, I had been in treatment and it hadn't gotten this bad. And the reason that I'm telling you this is just because I'm sharing with you what the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, that it gets worse, never better. And so I start you with that story with cocaine, because I'm going to come back to alcohol. Because what alcohol did, man, is exactly what the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says. I drank essentially for the effect produced by alcohol. Now, my problem was this. I could not control and enjoy alcohol. I couldn't do it. See, I have alcoholism. I'm dependent on alcohol. You know, when the pandemic was starting, I was out in front of my daughter's house, and my daughter says, oh, Daddy, you see what I ordered for the pandemic because I'm going to be staying inside? I go, what is that, baby? She said, oh, that's a case of wine. Well, I remember talking to her 2 months later, and she still had some of that wine from that case of wine. If I would have had that case of wine, the only thing that would have made that case of wine last a couple of days was just me simply being passed out. Because once I put it in my system, I have a physical allergy that cries for more. And I would have drank that case of wine as soon as I could, and then went and did other things. But what was miraculous is she told me a couple of weeks ago that, oh, I just finished that case of wine. I go, what? It's been like 5 months. And so that's not my experience with drugs and or alcohol. So I found out in studying the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous why I drank. I drank for the effect. Now, the big book in the forwards talks about, in Bill's story, talks about why Bill drank. He drank for excitement. He drank because he was lonely. Two different ends of the spectrum, you know. So what happens is this. I don't need a reason to drink other than just being conscious. If I'm conscious, I can drink, you know. And that's what I did. I started reading some things in the big book, man, that started to make sense with a sponsor. It started to talk about things like I was an outright mental defective. Well, when you slow down and you dissect what they really saying, is they really saying, Jimmy, your brain is broken. It's broken. And I'm like, why do they talk to me like that? And my sponsor said to me, he says, they're being real kind to you versus what they used to say to you when you were drinking and using. So I had to sit down and think about that. And then it gets to a part in the book where it starts to describe my behavior. And it talked about being an unlovely creature. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. They're saying I'm not even human. So I'm like, wow, an unlovely creature. Okay. I said, well, I don't want this. Then so I get into the doctor's opinion, man, and I find out why I drink, and I find out I have a mental obsession, and I have a physical allergy, and I find out, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? What that means is this, is that I can't stop starting because of my mind. My mind continues to convince me that my experience with drinking is going to be different, that I'm going to have a different outcome, that I'm going to be able to control it, that I'm not going to get sick, that the ceiling isn't going to spin, that I'm not going to throw up on my date. It convinces me all these things are going to happen. That's what my mind does. And then what it does, I take action on what my mind tells me, and I put it into my body. And in my body, I have what we call, what I found out to be an allergy. I found out that an allergy is an abnormal reaction. And what that means is simply this. When I put alcohol into my system says, I want more. So I knew that I couldn't starting because of my mind. And once I started, I couldn't stop because of my body. Man, that hit hard. So what I found out is after a while is my body started to tell my mind what to do. Because my mind would say, I want to stop. My body would say, I need more. I need more. And then I found out my body was so smart that my mind would say, get more, keep drinking, keep drinking, keep drinking. And my body was smart enough to throw it up. My body was smart enough to pass out. It was so much smarter than my brain. But I had to see this in my experiences. And so having all that information, I'm like, damn, why would I drink? Why would I drink? Why would I go back to that? So the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous told me on page 35, it says, what sort of thinking dominates the alcoholic who tries the desperate experiment of the first drink time and time again? Because I need to share with you every time before I drink and or use, I'm sober. I'm in a sober state. I make a decision sober to drink and use. And as a result of me making a decision sober to drink and use, then I knew when they got to the part of the Big Book and my sponsor broke it down to me, he said that alcohol was just a symptom. There were some things going on inside of me of a much deeper nature. He says, even when you don't have alcohol in your system, let's take a look at the decisions and the actions that you take. A sponsor is real important. I remember the first time I drank for the effect of alcohol. I remember it well. Beware of guys with nicknames. There was a guy named Sonny. We played football, and I'm going to tell you that I was an athlete, and I was the first four-sport letterman in the history of our school. Our football team won CIF, that's the California Interscholastic Federation Southern Section. We were 13-0. We had the #1 rushing offense and scoring offense in the nation. And so we made a pact that after every game, we were going to celebrate by drinking. Well, what happened is this guy named Sonny comes in, and we're in the gym, and we've been doing our pact. But in the gym is where we have our dances. But I don't know about you, but really I got low self-esteem, and I'm full of fear. But I'm an athlete, so I really hide behind my athletic skills. And so what happens is Sonny comes in, and all the guys are on one side of the gym, and all the girls are on the other side of the gym. And Sonny goes, Jimmy, come outside. I want you to try something. And I'm game. So I go outside, and Sonny's got a brown bag. It should have been the indicator, the brown bag. It's wrapped up, it's twisted at the top. And he says, hey, man, I want you to try something. Now, I want you to know when I walked out of the gym, I was 5'9", 145 pounds, and I wore a Corvadas haircut that was not in style. Name was Jimmie Andrews. So what happens is Sonny and I, we share a tall can of Old English 800. Now, I want to share with you, anybody that drinks Old English 800, you do not drink Old English 800 for the taste. That is the nastiest tasting beer I have ever had in my life. That was the nastiest tasting anything I had had in my mouth up until that time. Now, I say up until that time because you know the disease is progressive, so we'll get to that later. So what happens is we share that, man, and we turn around and we walk back up to the gym. And I stand at the gym door, man, and all of a sudden I'm no longer 5'9", but I'm 6'2". No longer am I wearing that Corvadas haircut that's out of style. My hair is laying down on my shoulders. No longer am I weighing 145 pounds, but I weigh 215 pounds. And no longer is my name Jimmie Andrews, but it is now Denzel Washington. And so what I do, man, with that mindset, I walk across the floor with all this courage to ask a young lady to dance. And on the way over there, I had already made up in my mind what I was going to say. And so I knew I was going to ask her to dance, and if she said no, I was going to look her right in the eye and tell her I didn't want to dance with your ugly ass anyway. Now, this is a guy with no self-esteem and full of fear. But after that half a can of Old English 800, something happened. Something happened, man. But by God's grace, I walked over to ask this girl to dance. And by God's grace, she said yes. And so she got up to dance, and I started beckoning the rest of the guys over to come dance, come dance. And all of a sudden, my sponsor showed me in the big book where it says, Bill fancied himself a leader. I related to that right then and there because I'm the guy that got everybody out on the floor to come dance. And what happened, man, is I always knew that there was some courage in the bottom of every can of Old English 800. That was the beginning of drinking for the effect. I went on and went to junior college, and I played football and baseball in junior college, and I was an All-American in both. I'm not telling you this to brag or boast. I'm telling you this is because my ambition from the time I was 8 years old was to play professional baseball. So what I did in college, in junior college, is I played at Pasadena City College, and we won our league. We went 13-1. We went 12-1 out of 13 games, and I was ranked number 3 in the nation as a defensive back. I was an All-American defensive back. Today, to this day, I hold the interception record at Pasadena City College. And I tell you that to tell you this. Drugs and alcohol wanted all of that, and they got all of that. I left there, and I went to the University of Nevada. Oh, well, first of all, I need to let you know, not only was I an athlete, but I was on the Dean's Honor Roll. I had a 3.85 GPA. And I was on the Dean's Honor Roll. And what happened, man, is I was smart, and I was a great athlete. And so I went to college at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas on a dual scholarship. Woo! If you have any doubt, if you're alcoholic, get a scholarship to the University of Nevada in Las Vegas, because what I learned to do at the University of Las Vegas is drink. I learned to drink. I knew how to get drunk, but I learned how to drink. I became a chemist. I knew how much cocaine it took to mix with my liquor so that I could drink all night long. And when you're an All-American and you're at a university, they take care of you. And so we ended up going to the Grantland Rice Bowl, and I ended up ineligible. Now, here's a guy who goes from the Dean's Honor Roll to being ineligible. And it had nothing to do with how smart I was, but it had something to do with the way that I thought. It had something to do with my behavior. And this is what it had to do with. So I had this class, and the athletic director called me into the office and said, Jimmie, you're ineligible to play in the playoffs. I go, what are you talking about? He says, yeah, you're failing the class. And he told me what class it was. I said, that's impossible. I says, I took 3 tests in that class, and on all 3 tests, I got A's. He says, you're absolutely correct, Jimmie. You took 3 tests, and you got A's, but there were 9 tests. And when I found out that I was in a blackout, sitting in the keno section, in one of the hotels, in one of the casinos, and my buddies would come wake me up and I would go home instead of go to class. I had missed 6 tests and I became ineligible to play in the Grantland Rice Bowl. So I end up leaving college at that time, man, after getting drafted, because my mom wanted me to finish college. After getting drafted, I left, and I go back and I play in this league, man, and I go play in the San Francisco Giants rookie league, and I'm doing well. And one day, not a cloud on the horizon, after a great game, all of a sudden my mind told me to tell them that I needed to go home to take care of some business with my wife. And they gave me a furlough. Give me a time check. Okay. And so what happened was I go home and I get loaded. And they told me to be back in 3 days. And I showed up. I didn't even get to my wife's house in 3 days. I didn't get to my wife's house for about 5 days. And when I got to her house, I said, hey, how you doing? I took a couple of days off to come spend some time with you. She says, yeah. She said, the organization's been calling for you. And I said, they did? She says, yeah, you were supposed to be back 2 days ago. I said, oh, man, I better get ready and get back. She says, no. They said, don't come back. So from the age of 8 till at that time I was 22 years old, that's all I wanted to do was play professional baseball. I'm in camp. I'm doing well. And the disease that I suffer from convinced me to leave camp and to go get loaded. And I did that. And so what happens is it gets worse, and I end up walking away, and I end up driving buses. And I'm driving buses downtown Los Angeles. And they said, if you can drive the 30 or the 31 line, then you can drive any line. And I drove them both loaded. You know, if you ever got on my bus, man, it wasn't a ride. It was an adventure. Because what I do, man, with a bus, people do with Volkswagens. You know, I dip in and out of the traffic, you know. I do crazy things with buses, man, you know. Under the influence of drugs and alcohol, man. I do cocaine all night, and I drink all night, and I drive buses all day. As a result, I had a heart attack, and I go to the hospital, and they stuck this thing up into my groin and pumped up this balloon, because what had happened is the left lower part of my heart muscle had collapsed. And the doctor is asking me things like, you know, they've been taking blood. Well, are you doing any drugs? And I'm like, no. I said, man, they drug test us at work. And she says, well, we found some cocaine in your system. And I'm like, how could you find cocaine in my system? Man, they test us at work. Now, they tested us when we got the job, but they hadn't tested me since. So anyway, I'm in the hospital, And I'm scared. And the reason I'm scared is I had a brother die of a heart attack at 33 years old. And I'm in the hospital and they're treating me for a heart attack. But what happens on the third day is my girlfriend shows up to the hospital, and you would think that your girlfriend would walk in and say, "Hey, Jimmie, how you doing? How's your heart? How are they treating you? Are the nurses good to you? How's the food?" You would think that you would have some kind of conversation like that. The conversation went nothing like that. The conversation kind of went like this. She came right through the door. I'm laying in the bed, and I got all these things hooked up to me. And the first thing she says is, "I'm hitting first." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm hitting first." And so we debate about who's going to hit first. But I'm going to back up and tell you that on the first day, well, no, on that third day, when she came in and we're having this argument, this debate, she wins the debate. And so what I had learned from the first day is how to disconnect all the wires and everything. Because on the first day I was there, before I knew I had a heart attack, I had to use the bathroom. And so I get up and I've got this cart, and I've got all these wires in me, and I'm carrying these wires, and all these bells and whistles start going off, and they're going off and they're blowing, and I'm standing there, and my butt is out. You got that little robe on where your ass is out, and I'm trying to get to the bathroom, and I stop because all these bells and whistles is going off, and I hadn't heard no shit like that since I was robbing Circuit City. And so what happened, man, is the nurses come rushing in. They go, Mr. Andrews, what are you doing?" I said, "Ma'am, I'm going to the bathroom." And she said, "Mr. Andrews, you must not know what your condition is." I said, "Sure I do, ma'am. I have to go to the bathroom." And she said, "Mr. Andrews, you've had a heart attack." I swear on everything right now today, I can't remember if I ever went to the bathroom or not. But I do remember being back in that bed, asking God, now here's my manipulation prayer, asking God, please don't do this to my mother again. Because see, I had used all my dope fiend prayers about, God, get me out of this one, I'll never do it again. But here I am asking God, don't do this to my mother. And so what happens is 6 days later, the doctor comes in and says, your condition is stable. I don't know about you, but that's not what I heard the doctor say. What I heard the doctor say is, Jimmie, you can get loaded again. So what happens is, man, I get loaded in the hospital after having a heart attack. That's how powerful I know this disease is. And that's how I experience my powerlessness. That's powerlessness, when you know that cocaine and alcohol and the lifestyle you're living just created this condition where you had a heart attack, and in a sober state of mind, the first thing I wanted to do was more cocaine and more alcohol. I'm thoroughly convinced that I'm powerless. I get sober, and the way I get sober is I go to a homeless shelter in Pasadena that has a 12-step meeting. And what happens is we study the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous every morning and every day. I went to that meeting every day, and I got sober on July 11th, 1988. And I need to let you know that I tried to get sober before that, but I didn't. I had the heart attack on April the 13th, 1987. And what happened in 1987 on April the 13th, it was my mother's birthday. It was another year and 2 months before I could get, 3 months before I could get sober. But I got sober. And when I got sober, man, I did exactly what people in Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous told me to do. I got a sponsor. I studied the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to meetings. I sponsored people. With 90 days of sobriety, I was at a homeless shelter. So at 90 days in a homeless shelter, you're an old timer, just in case you didn't know. So I was an old timer, and so I was sponsoring 8 guys. And I'd like to tell you that they stayed sober, but they didn't. And I told my sponsor, I said, man, all my sponsees got loaded. And my sponsor said, all your what? I said, all my sponsees. He said, what are you doing trying to sponsor somebody? You don't have a solution. And I said, well, I knew more than they knew. What I found out, though, is this. Though they got loaded, I was trying to carry a message of hope. And I found out that's exactly what Bill and Bob did. And what Bill and Bob did is they carried the message and they stayed sober. What I found out is, though, is Ebby carried the message to Bill. And what I found out is that Ebby got loaded on a resentment because Bill and Bob's relationship got good. I know about resentments and I know about relationships. I got married in this program, and I married the woman that already had my last name. So I knew she was God sent. Unfortunately, I hadn't done the work to work on my insecurities and my immaturity. She was a grown-ass woman, and I was an immature, insecure addict early in recovery. And I married her with 5 years, still not putting the information into application on a consistent basis. What happened was this. We ended up getting a divorce. But while we were separated, I got into the work because I got desperate. I got, just like the big book said, I got desperate about changing my life. And that was my motivation to change my life. And I told her, I said, I'm going to be the best boyfriend you ever had. And I treated her just like we were dating. And after a couple of years, I got the divorce papers. And but in that 2 years where I worked really hard on recovery and on being a better human being, she became my best friend. She became my best friend. And as of today, she's still one of my best friends, you know. And we've been divorced since 2002. But every year, I take her to dinner for her birthday. And it's a result of the 12-step process. It's the result of me tapping into a source of power that's God. It's a result of me going to meetings where you guys are at. It's a result of me doing all 3 sides of the triangle: unity, service, and recovery. I'm eternally grateful to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous. I'm eternally grateful for the friends that I've met. I got here, man, and they said I would have a host of new friends, and I do. I had to change my old play places, my old playmates. You know, what I did in recovery, what I did in treatment, because I went to treatment early, I did everything they told me to do. And they did a little circle, and it was like Jimmie was the most likely to succeed. And I was loaded 90 days later. Because what I knew how to do is comply. I didn't know how to change. And I know many of us know how to comply. Those of us that have been to jail, we know how to comply. When they say put your shoulder up against that wall, we know how to put our shoulder up against the wall. But I didn't know how to change. I did some things, man, that show that I don't have power. There's a reading in another meeting, and it talks about any white speck. And when I was getting loaded, we used to pick up these white specks when we were getting loaded, and we put them in our mouth, and we take them through what we call the taste test. And if it was good shit, we would say, man, that's some good shit, man. And we would chop it up, or we would smoke it up. We would do something. And unfortunately, I picked up some white specks and taken them through the taste test because I smoked in some strange places sometimes. Sometimes I smoked in places like pigeon coops. So I'm in the pigeon coop, and I don't know about you, but I always think I dropped something. So I thought I had dropped something in the pigeon coop, and I reached down and I picked it up. And I want to tell you, I thought it was cocaine, so I put it in my mouth. I want to share with you, it's been almost 32 years since I had to eat some bird shit. You know, my life is so good. My life is so good. I've done all the steps. I live the steps now. I don't work the steps. I live the steps now. The steps are intuitive. I got to page 84 and 85 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got free. I got free. And the steps work. The 12 steps work. The big book works. What doesn't work, well, I'm not going to tell you what doesn't work. Have your experience with doing things your way. And hopefully you live through it, you know. But getting to God, for me, was the solution because I needed some power. I needed some power. I'm going to share some things with you. I understand there might be some treatment centers at this meeting. And you might be in treatment because you want to slow down. You want to slow down. And you might really believe that slowing down and stopping is the same thing. Well, I have a friend that told me a story a long time ago. And it was about this guy that was driving his car, and he went to turn, and he kind of rolled through the stop sign. In California, we call that a California stop. I don't know what you call it in Arizona, but in California, we call it a California stop. In Arizona, you probably call it the Arizona stop, you know, where you roll right through the stop sign. So the guy rolls right through the stop sign, and the police pull up behind him, pulls him over, and comes up to the car, and the guy goes, "How you doing, officer? What's going on?" He says, "Can I see your driver's license and your registration, please?" He says, "Yeah, sir, what did I do?" He says, "Well, you didn't stop at the stop sign back there." And the guy goes, I certainly did, sir. I did stop at the stop sign." He says, "No, you slowed down and then you rolled through it." And the guy said, "Sir, I stopped." He says, "No, sir, you didn't stop. You slowed down and you rolled through it." And he said, "Sir, I stopped." He said, "Sir, I want to tell you something. Slowing down, stopping, what is the difference?" So he says, "Sir, can you step out of the car, please?" So the guy steps out of the car, and the police officer pulls out his billy club, and he starts beating the guy. And he's beating him, and he's beating him. And then he looks down at the guy, and he says, "Now, sir, do you want me to slow down, or do you want me to stop?" And so the guy says, he got the message. The slow down and stop is not the same thing. So if you're in treatment and you want to just slow down, you might think about, you might have another beating coming. You might have another ass whooping coming. There's some more bottoms waiting for you. And you don't want to hit those bottoms, you know. What time am I supposed to stop?
Well, it's 7:53. I think she said at 5 till, so.
At 7:55?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jimmie, 7:55.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to share this with you. My sponsor told me I needed to change, and I needed to change everything. Everything was just too much. So I hear a priest tell a story, and I'm going to share this story with you, and I'm going to stop. It's about change. About this guy and this girl, they get married. Prior to them getting married, they don't have any sex. And so on their wedding day, they go to this really nice hotel, and he's a really big guy. And he picks his wife up and he carries her across the threshold and he lays her down on the bed. And he looks down at her and she's all happy and everything. And he takes his pants off and he throws them into the middle of the room. And he looks down at the little wife and he points at her and he says, "Wife, put those pants on." And the little wife says, "Husband, I can't wear those pants." And the husband looked at her with a stern look and pointed at her and said, "And don't you forget it." And the little wife says, "Oh my God, what have I gotten myself into?" So the little lady stood up and she took her little panties off and she threw them into the middle of the room. And she looked at the big husband and says, "Husband, get in those panties." And the big husband looks at the little wife and he says, "Wife, I can't get in those panties." And she looks at him with a stern look and says, "And you never will until you change your attitude." And it's been but for God's grace, not anything to do with panties, but that's just a story. But for God's grace that I have changed my attitude about a lot of things. And one thing is that God has to be at the center of everything that I do. I want to thank Tiffany. I want to thank Greg. And I want to thank Alcoholics Anonymous for inviting me.
Thank you, Jimmie. I have asked, thank you, Jimmie. Sorry, I was a little distracted there for a second. Thank you very much for sharing your story. I'm going to have JJ read the promises, and then I'll have you take us out with a prayer of your choice.
Very good.
I'm JJ. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor will we wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them.
Thank you, JJ, and I want to thank all the readers tonight and for everybody that showed up to listen to Jimmie's story. And again, thank you, Greg, for connecting us. If you are interested in hearing the recording from tonight or from any of our previous speakers that we had the opportunity to record, some of them we missed, you can find us at the Friday Night Speaker channel or the Friday Night Speaker meeting on YouTube. And we're going to close with a prayer of Jimmie's choice.
The Serenity Prayer. God,
grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Amen.
Thank you, Jimmie.
Thank you, Tiffany. God bless you.
Thank you, Jimmie.
Thank you, Greg.